gap, standing for Jesus, standing in the gap for family and friends, standing in the gap, one love for all, so we all can make it in.
Now, also, we've dedicated a portion of our ministry to what we call the Gap News. And what the Gap News is keep you up on current events. And the reason for that is because Jesus said that we have a commission, a great commission, to spread the gospel to the world, to highways and the byways, all corners of the world. In order to do that, we need to know what's going on in the world so we can use or attack it in the way that it needs to be attacked. And so we have dedicated Gap News and let you know what's going on. Marvel does this. She comes up with the current events that need to be addressed and need to be understood. And so she is here with Gap News.
There's always so much going on. And, you know, we've been hearing ever since they called it Liberation Day, we've been hearing about these tariffs. 145%, 50%, 30%. I got mad at the EU. Now it's 50%. Oh, I'm going to pause it. All of this stuff has been going on. And nobody seemed to realize that all of what that President Trump was doing was actually illegal. So I'm going to talk about the illegal tariffs and what happened with them.
Well, as I say, the breaking news of the night is that Donald Trump's illegal tariffs are gone, thanks to a ruling of the United States Court of International Trade. Futures trading is now soaring tonight in the expectation of an explosively positive reaction by the stock market tomorrow when the world will reset itself around the restoration of law and order in international trade and the crushing of the Trump tariffs and resultant personal worldwide humiliation of Donald Trump. The Trump tariffs were always illegal and unconstitutional, and you heard that on this program every time we covered Donald Trump's comments about tariffs, including very much during the presidential campaign when the campaign press corps never, ever reported to voters that the Trump proposed tariffs during the campaign were completely illegal and unconstitutional. The campaign press corps never reported to voters that those proposals were constitutionally insane, and the person pronouncing those proposals at those Trump rallies was constitutionally out of his mind just based on what he was saying about tariffs alone. The campaign press corps completely failed the American voter on this issue, with American voters just discovering tonight from the International Court of Trade just how illegal and unconstitutional the Trump tariffs always have been. The United States Court of International Trade, which has exclusive jurisdiction over cases involving tariff disputes, has ruled unanimously that when it comes to tariffs, Donald Trump does not have, quote, unbounded authority, and the court sets aside the challenged tariffs. The court gave the plaintiffs suing the Trump administration even more than they expected. The plaintiffs include 12 states with Democratic governors who sued, arguing that the Trump tariffs are unconstitutional and illegal, and asked the court for at least a temporary injunction, temporarily blocking the tariffs. But the court went all the way and delivered a full and final ruling in the case, granting what the court calls a summary judgment against Donald Trump and all of his tariffs. So as of this hour tonight, it is no longer legal at any port of entry in the United States for a United States Customs Service to collect a single dollar of Trump tariffs. Civil lawsuits like this seldom have such total and complete and final victories just 2 weeks after the court heard arguments in the case. Victories in this case for plaintiffs at this stage of this kind of litigation are very unusual, but here we are. And as I've been reporting to you literally for years now, There are few things more clear in law than Congress's complete authority over tariffs. The Court of International Trade said in its opinion that even if Congress wanted to give Donald Trump power over tariffs, it would be unconstitutional to do so. Quote, an unlimited delegation of tariff authority would constitute an improper abdication of legislative power to another branch of government. Donald Trump's illegal tariffs were based on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. And today, finally, the Court of International Trade said what I've been saying since the day Donald Trump invoked that law to support his tariffs. Quote, any interpretation of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act that delegates unlimited tariff authority is unconstitutional. The court rejected Donald Trump's claim of a national emergency to justify his tariffs, saying the mere incantation of national emergency cannot, of course, sound the death knell of the Constitution. And that's what Donald Trump is trying to do. He's trying to kill the Constitution of the United States in a different way every day. He tried and failed, thanks to the Court of International Trade, to sound the death knell of the Constitution by stealing Congress's exclusive power over tariffs. And in a 49-page ruling co-authored by 3 judges of the Court of International Trade in New York City, Donald Trump's attempts to kill the Constitution this time have failed. Judge Gary Katzmann was appointed by President Obama. Judge Jane Rustani was appointed by Republican President Ronald Reagan. Judge Timothy Reif was appointed by Republican President Donald Trump. And those 3 judges unanimously agreed to every word in tonight's breaking news opinion that there is nothing in American law that can make Donald Trump's tariffs legal. 2 sets of plaintiffs brought cases to the Court of International Trade, and in their unanimous opinion tonight, the court said the question in the 2 cases before the court is whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 delegates these powers to the president in the form of authority to impose unlimited tariffs on goods from nearly every country in the world. The court does not read the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to confer such unbounded authority and sets aside the challenged tariffs imposed thereunder. For Donald Trump's benefit, though he, of course, could never actually read a single page of a court opinion, but mostly for the benefit of the United States Supreme Court, the trade experts on the Court of International Trade wrote a brief history of international trade right in their opinion, and a brief history of international trade law for Donald Trump's Supreme Court justices to study, because they know very little about international trade law. When Donald Trump, no doubt, appeals this case all the way up to the judges on the Supreme Court who he believes owe him their permanent loyalty. The trade court identified 3 different kinds of tariffs Donald Trump was illegally imposing and ruled against each of them, calling each of them illegal and unconstitutional. The court referred to tariffs imposed on countries to indirectly force them to somehow stop the flow of fentanyl around the world and other illicit drugs that are illegal, because tariffs cannot legally be used to leverage the behavior of other governments on issues other than regulated international trade. The court wrote, a tax deals with a budget deficit by raising revenue. A dam deals with flooding by holding back a river. But there is no such association between the act of imposing a tariff and the unusual and extraordinary threats that the trafficking orders purport to combat. The trafficking orders do not deal with their stated objectives. Rather, as the government acknowledges, the orders aim to create leverage to deal with those objectives. That use is impermissible, not because it is unwise or ineffective, but because Section 1701 does not allow it. The court laid out the legal specifics, striking down all of what Donald Trump calls his reciprocal tariffs And throughout the opinion, the court was very clear that Congress would have the authority to impose any of these tariffs, but the president simply does not have that legal authority. In the same sense that the president does have the power to pardon people convicted of federal crimes, which Donald Trump is doing in the most corrupt manner in history, but Congress does not have the power to pardon people convicted of federal crimes. These distinctions in presidential and congressional power have always been easy and simple for people to understand, and no one has ever disputed them, just as no one has ever imagined prior to Donald Trump that a president has the authority to raise or lower tariffs. The court went through a painful recitation of all the tariffs Donald Trump has threatened to impose and then reduced and then postponed, saying every one of those decisions was made illegally. The court explained that a summary judgment is the only possible way in this case that this case can be resolved and needs to be resolved now. And this court explained the standards for a summary judgment, saying the court shall grant summary judgment if the movement shows that there is no genuine dispute as to any material fact, and the movement is entitled to judgment as a matter of law. That is a very high bar, but Donald Trump's constitutional illiteracy easily delivered a summary judgment to the states and other plaintiffs to end all of the Trump tariffs and not allow them to be collected at any port of entry anywhere in the United States. The court, of course, cited James Madison, writing in the Federalist Papers on the importance of separation of powers, and said an unlimited delegation of tariff authority would be unconstitutional. The court said, quote, the president's assertion of authority here has no meaningful limiting standards, essentially enabling him to impose any tariff rate he wants on any country at any time for virtually any reason. The court stopped that madness tonight. It's over. The Trump tariff madness ends now. The court said Donald Trump's attempt to use our international trade balance of payments with countries around the world as a reason for a president to impose tariffs was illegal and unconstitutional. Donald Trump has lost in court many times before, most notably in the 34 guilty verdicts returned against him by a jury of his peers in a criminal case in Manhattan last year. And the judgment against Donald Trump by the Court of International Trade will now take its place among those legal cases in which Donald Trump has lost, and lost decisively on every single point that Donald Trump raised in the court.
They looked at Trump's request for a stay pending appeal, and that request also said, hey, while you're considering this stay pending appeal, why don't you go ahead and issue a very brief administrative stay that just immediately puts this on hold while you consider a longer lasting stay. So right at this moment, the trade court that issued this sweeping, kind of shocking decision last night, blocking these tariffs, finding them illegal, that is currently paused while the court considers whether to issue a longer lasting stay pending appeal.
So, long story short of all of that, the Court of International Trade, a bipartisan court with Reagan, Trump, and Obama appointees. These are people who are experts in international trade, federal judges. They said everything, all the tariffs, everything was unconstitutional and illegal. And they said no tariffs. That was on Thursday night. Friday, Donald Trump's lawyers ran into the appeals court and said, hey, we need a stay. And so that's what that end part of it was. So right now, there is a temporary stay. I believe next week, there's going to be a hearing with the appeals court to say, do we want to keep this stay, or do we want to go ahead and let this previous judgment go through? And then, of course, I'm sure he'll go to the Supreme Court where he thinks he owns them. But what do you think, honey?
Well, you know, a lot of that what Lawrence was talking about, we learned in law school about summary judgment, and when it's just so clear. When it's just so clear, we're not going to go through a whole trial witnesses, evidence, and all that, because that makes no sense. So that procedure is in the law, and it was used properly. It was used properly by them. A lot of people didn't know about this international trade court or whatever, but it is a court, and it's bound by the provisions of the rules of procedure and all that kind of thing. And one thing I am surprised though is when Lawrence did not use the word stupid in the clips that
I'm not in that part.
that you showed, but when you look at his whole body of work, he used the word stupid so many times, and it's really appropriate. It's really appropriate for what's going on with these trades, because the Constitution says something. And the real stupid part about it is that Donald Trump, you ever heard say coming up the rough side of the mountain? I mean, he's coming up the rough side of the mountain because, the Republicans control Congress, and what the Constitution law says is that you can't do those tariffs unless you get consent of Congress. He controls Congress. Why not go that route? Why go up this rough side other than, as Lawrence said, stupidity?
Well, he actually was in a press conference after the summary judgment was issued, and his team had made an appeal. And what he said was, trying to get hundreds of people to agree with me, that's too much trouble.
It hasn't been.
Well, I mean, that's the way it's supposed to work. We got 3 separate and co-equal branches of our government, not one that does everything and says everything and rules everything. We have 3 separate and co-equal branches. Now, our Congress has been pretty much asleep at the wheel since January 20th, but that doesn't mean that they don't have power and that they don't have to be engaged in things like tariffs.
But when you control most of the people in the Congress, then you can really get away with almost anything. Adds to this big beautiful bill. Watch that. Watch how that comes out. Yeah,
we'll get to that after the Senate has their say on it. We will get to that. But
all right.
I'm just looking. Doesn't look like anybody made any comments about that. But
it's
so
just done.
for right now, and then one other thing I just want to point out: the whole time that he was campaigning and he was saying, I'm going to put tariffs on the whole world. He has a tariff on an island that is uninhabited except by penguins. He has a tariff on that island. So, I mean, it's just crazy. But nobody ever reported to the people in America that what he's proposing to do is totally illegal. None of the reporters ever said, this is illegal. He can't do it. Don't pay any attention to that because that's not legal. Whatever.
All righty.
Okay, I guess that's
Gap
it, honey,
News.
for our Gap News.
Nobody commented on Gap News, but they always wait until afterwards to send in their remarks about Gap News and how much they love Gap News. Well, we love Gap News, and Marble, we love you. Thank you.